September 27th, 2006, Bailey, Colorado. A 53-year-old drifter walked into Platte Canyon High School and took 6 girls hostage. During the ensuing siege, he sexually assaulted all of the girls. When a SWAT team stormed the classroom, he killed 16-year-old Emily Keyes, then took his own life after being shot and wounded by the police. April 16, 2007, Blacksburg, Virginia. A 23-year-old Virginia Tech student killed 32 student and faculty members and wounded another 17 in 2 separate attacks before committing suicide. November 5, 2017, Sutherland Springs, Texas. A 26-year-old man opened fire during church services at First Baptist Church, killing 26 people, which includes 8 people from one family alone. He was later found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, with drugs found to still be in his system. Albert Einstein said, "The world is a dangerous place to live, not because of the people who are evil, but because of the people who don't do anything about it." What can we do? We are on a true mission to further secure and protect our schools and places of worship and provide resources that will help save lives. Join us. Through our 2 organizations, Angel Shield and Bullets Both Ways, we plan to do all we can to help make a difference in our communities and culture. Angel Shield is our nonprofit and tax-exempt 501c3 public charity. Our foundation's primary purpose is to raise funds to support and provide mental health resources in our schools, along with equipping school facilities and houses of worship with updated safety and physical security measures. Unfortunately, the majority of our nation's schools do not have the adequate budget to implement additional protection measures or increase trained security personnel, nor is there enough tax revenue allocated for these additional protection measures. Angel Shield will provide services, products, and grants to these institutions and houses of worship, and also host and/or participate in events and activities that support and implement various protection objectives. We cannot rely on government funding to make our schools or places of worship safe. It comes down to good American citizens like yourself who believe in our inalienable rights and the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. Bullets Both Ways is a bold American brand, apparel line, and resource specifically created to promote, organize, and help fund efforts for increased defenses in our schools, worship centers, and communities. Every purchase of Bullets Both Ways apparel and merchandise will help sponsor medical and firearm training scholarships for school and church staff who are willing to be a first layer of defense. Wearing Bullets Both Ways brand shows our youth and the general public your support for an immediate response to evil perpetrators by those who are willing and able, good guys and gals with guns, trained and prepared to stop evil perpetrators from accomplishing their devastation. We are willing and able to send bullets both ways. The missions of Angel Shield and Bullets Both Ways are aligned. Increase security, safety, and protection in our nation's schools and houses of worship. Edmund Burke said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." You can do something. Get involved in your local school districts. Influence and help persuade your local school boards to implement multi-layered safety and security measures. You can support the effort through Angel Shield. Angel Shield's effectiveness is totally dependent upon the contributions of concerned citizens and corporations who want to support school safety measures and mental health resources. Above all, stand up, represent, prepare, protect.
Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. Absolutely appreciate it. It comes down to people like you that are going to help us make a difference with regards to school safety and security in our communities. I'd also like to take a moment and thank our event sponsor, KLA, Certified Public Accountants. They're a great supporter of both Angel Shield and Bullets Both Ways. My name's Aaron Boyd. I'm the founder of both Angel Shield and Bullets Both Ways. 20 years ago, here in Colorado, a school violence tragedy changed our nation. It is fitting that the solution should start here as well. The violence our children now face in our schools includes bullying, beatings, bomb threats, shootings, knife attacks, and more. Parents and their children shouldn't have to fear worst-case scenarios in their schools. This violence needs to stop. All of us are concerned about school safety. We can unite in our efforts to make our schools safer places for our children. Schools don't have the adequate budgets to increase safety and security and mental health resources. We also can't rely on government tax funding. I started Bullets Both Ways a year and a half ago because I strongly believe in protecting others, as well as trained and armed teachers and school staff as immediate defenders. I created Angel Shield to reach an even broader audience by supporting and specifically focusing on physical school protection measures and mental health resources. There is no simple answer to school violence and shootings. It is a complex societal problem. However, the purpose of our forum tonight is to begin to work towards solutions that we all can support. How can we do that? Through information, discussion, and making a personal commitment to become more involved in our schools and school districts. We are here to educate and inform on the state policy and the options it provides to districts, teachers, parents, and all citizens. At the end of the forum, I'll show you some ways you can get involved and become part of the solution. Now, before we move on to the panel discussion, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Deborah Flora. Deborah is the host of the syndicated radio show, Bring It Up, with listeners across America and over 45 countries. She is an author, a producer, and as director of public policy at Salem, Denver, she is a frequent radio contributor on national and local issues. A member of the leadership program of the Rockies Advisory Council and the American Enterprise Institute's Leadership Network, Deborah speaks around the country at large national gatherings. As a partner in Lamplight Entertainment, she has produced commercials, public service announcements, television, and film projects. And as Miss Colorado and second runner-up to Miss America, she has spoken around the world. Deborah, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate it. Thank you all. It's great to be here. It's such an important topic. All of those things are secondary, I think, to my number one role, and that's as mom. And I think that's why we're all here. We've all been affected. I had two nephews who were in Columbine, so I remember the hours of not hearing because it was before lots of cell phones. I have gotten that call from my own children when the STEM shooting was going on, and it's a call you don't want to get. Mom, school's in lockdown. I'm scared. What do I do? And like most of you, the first thing I wanted to tell my daughter was, you're fine, you're safe. And I stopped myself and I asked this question, can I say that? Can I honestly say that? That's why we're here tonight, because one of the things I so appreciate about what Aaron is doing through Angel Shield and Bullets Both Ways is a lot of times we're robbed of the opportunity to have a real conversation. Because the minute something happens, obviously there's a lot of grief, but there's also a lot of loud voices that kind of shut that down. Here tonight, we're in the spirit of having a real conversation that we are all entitled to. A conversation about how we can actually protect our kids at school and at churches. It works in all of these different areas. And I appreciate you as the members that are here. Thank you for coming. And thank you for also, when we get to the part of open question, keeping that in mind. No matter where you may fall on these different ideas, we're all here for the same reason. We want to keep our kids safe. We want to make sure that we never have a student who once again has to be the first person stepping in the way of that bullet. So thank you for being here. I'm very honored to be a part of this. If I wasn't here, I'd be there listening to what the great panel has to say. So a few things, as I said, the ground rules. There will be a point in time after we have this forum conversation where we're going to open up the microphones. And when we do that, I know that you guys are going to enter into those questions the way that this forum is set up, in the spirit of it, which is to be respectful, to ask a fruitful question, and to realize that we're all here for the same purpose, to protect kids. We're going to be talking about lots of different issues. We're going to talk about current safety situation in schools. That's a good place to know where we start. How dangerous behavior and warning signs are currently reported, how they're addressed, how we can see them. We're going to talk about really what is going on in this mental health crisis perhaps that we're seeing, and how do we see that, address it, how is it being approached right now. We're going to talk about situational awareness, both before something happens and when it is perhaps occurring in that moment. We're also going to talk about armed defenders and first responders. First of all, I just have to say personally, so grateful for every single first responder. Thank you to them who are always willing to step in, but we're going to talk about a lot of different solutions. That's why I'm grateful that I'm going to be a participant like you all, listening to a wonderful panel that will be addressing all of these. So I'm going to introduce our panel now. Evan Todd, and please come up as I'm reading your bio. Evan Todd was the first student shot in the Columbine High School library. After realizing that he was still alive, he watched the perpetrators as they went around and systematically killed some of his classmates. He was actually the last person to talk to the killers, and he persuaded them to not let him be one of their final victims. He incurred gunshot wounds to the face, the neck, and the back. I've been privileged to have Evan on the show before, and he's so generous to share a very hard-earned perspective on this topic. He is now a dedicated advocate for life and liberty as the communications director for Bullets Both Ways and Angel Shield. He's a strong supporter and advocate for armed staff and our nation's schools. Let's welcome Evan Todd. Great. Our next panelist is Jana Richardson. Jana has a master's degree and she's a licensed professional counselor. She founded the Southeast Christian Counseling Center, has worked at La Casa Domestic Violence Shelter, the public school systems at the EI and EMI classrooms. She also has a private practice. Due to the rise in violence within our schools and across the nation, Jana realized the need to develop a team and a training regimen to address the changing times and how we are protecting our children. Another thing that Jana does is she works in hospice, so she's also very good at dealing with the grief that frequently, well, that always happens after these situations. Welcome, Jana. Laura Carno is the founder of Faster Colorado, a project of the Independence Institute. Faster is an organization that offers training for armed teachers and school staff members, ensuring that those armed defenders have access to world-class training. She's the author of the book, Government Ruins Nearly Everything, personal title, favorite of mine. Laura operates on the principle that if we truly want to fix large societal problems, why would we turn them over to the government to fix? I like that because the forum today is about citizens fixing some of these problems. More about Laura can be found at lauracarno.com. Let's welcome Laura Carno to the stage. And last but definitely not least, we have Sergeant Quinn Cunningham. He's been in law enforcement for 22 years and has been a member of the SWAT team since 2000. He currently serves as the Academy Director. Sergeant Cunningham is a member of the Colorado Post Firearms Subject Matter Expert Committee, as well as the owner of Fortitude Training Concepts, LLC. Welcome, Quinn. Well, great. Let's just jump right in. We talked about some of the topics that we're going to be discussing, and before we go into some more questions, and I'm going to personally ask first, let's talk about from the higher level viewpoint some of these topics. So first of all, current safety measures. What's actually the current situation in our schools? And, you know, Quinn, why don't you go ahead and kick that one off?
Well, currently, it really depends on the budget that the schools have. In the metro area, there are security guards and locked doors and different layers of security. Going out to the eastern and western slope, they're missing some of that just because of the funding.
We want to hear every word.
Am I going to have to hold that?
Yes, you do. And you can handle it. I know you can. This will be for you guys to pass around. Do not be afraid of a microphone, Quinn.
Doesn't have a trigger on it.
Okay, go ahead.
We need to start over. You guys, okay. So what we would like to see is we would like to see our children protected like our money is. What we would like to see is our schools look like casinos, where there are cameras, there are specific points of egress and ingress, and people who are ready to protect our kids. If we protected them, our legacy, our commitment to the furtherance of this country, if we could just protect that in our children, we would be good. And we just need layers of security.
And what is the current situation? Like your average school, it may be different in every district, but what would you find in a school right now?
Right now, like I said, it's going to depend on where that school's at, but you might have locked doors. You might have security guards, unarmed security guards. Maybe some have some armed security guards. Hopefully, and I pray that the teachers are receiving some training on response to some active threats. They're trained on situational awareness and things like that.
Okay, great. Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, there will be a theme throughout the panel this evening of parents, grandparents know the answers to these questions at your kid's school. So we all have a set of experience, but we might not be working with your kid's school. But these are questions that you as parents, you as grandparents should know the answer to these questions. I visit a lot of schools, and you heard Quinn say some have locked doors. I assumed erroneously that was everywhere locked their doors, and it's just not. So you know everything that's going on at your kids' schools, so that you understand the current state.
Okay, great. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but what would you recommend that someone do to know? I mean, a lot of parents may think I should know this, but they don't even know who to ask, or they feel awkward. What would you recommend to that parent? Who would they speak to?
Yeah, so it depends on the school district, but sometimes it's just the principal of that school. Sometimes it's the superintendent. I always recommend that to parents that you know all of those people. We usually know our kids' teachers, but you should also know the principal. You should also know the superintendent. And for goodness sakes, go to the school board meetings. I know that they're not as exciting as maybe Dancing with the Stars or something else that's on that night. But these are people making policy that is going to affect your kids. And if you look at it, I feel like I'm hogging the mic, but if you look at it this way, you are hiring a school to teach your kids. Because here in Colorado, we can send our kids to the neighborhood school, or we can go to the other neighborhood school over there, or we can go to the charter school. We have a lot of choices. I thought I got cut off.
No, we did not do that at all.
Time, a hook. But if you look at it that way, you are hiring somebody to teach your kids. Part of that is you expect those kids to return home alive every single day. Not most days, every single day. That is not a high bar. And so go talk to your school board, to your principal with that in mind. I'm hiring a school. If you were hiring anybody, you would ask lots of questions to see if they were the right person to fix the plumbing problem in your house or whatever else you're hiring somebody for. So long-winded question, but that's what parents should be doing.
Okay, great. We're going to come back and circle around to these different things, but as we continue with these higher level views of things, there's been a lot of conversation about behavioral issues in schools. How is that dealt with? Leniency and reporting, and sometimes we hear that is potentially lax. Evan, why don't you talk about what is going on right now sometimes with this? If someone spots behavior, what is the policy and how has this been dealt with frequently?
Yeah, across the nation and across Colorado, it varies school district to school district. One thing that's being brought to light in the aftermath of the Parkland shooting from Andrew Pollock, who lost his daughter, Meadow, is the policies that have been enacted and really are sweeping across the country with leniency and not addressing behavioral issues or even criminal activity. And I can tell you firsthand from all the way back Columbine through every school shooting, when something happens, the students in the school know. Every time they say, I knew it was going to be this person. And it's not hard to identify. These are troubled individuals who show a pattern of violence, of threats. They're usually committing crimes with threats that they're making and other things. And so that is, to me, one of the first lines of prevention is really taking a look at what the policies of the school districts have on disciplinary actions and leniency programs, and dig into it. And I don't want to speak too much to Andrew Pollack's book, but take a look at that and see the programs that have been enacted from the local, state, and federal levels that are in some ways enabling these school shooters to get to the destination that's ultimately very deadly and destructive.
So this is something that isn't necessarily just a district or a school policy, but you actually see it enacted in law in some cases. Is that correct? Where there is a mandated leniency if you know, instead of expelling a student for certain behavior, is that correct?
That is, and sadly it boils down to, in the case of Parkland, data and meeting certain standards of, you know, they wanted to show better graduation rates and better attendance and better, you know, all those statistical landmarks that they want to hit to boost their numbers. They're steering away from actually doing what's necessary to deal with disciplinary action so that their numbers look better in the district. And that's something that I'd rather see more disciplinary action taken when something happens than none, and creating an environment that is deadly and dangerous.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit later too about some of the policies like safe to tell, et cetera.
Yeah.
But that leads to, Jana, I want to ask you this question. When we're talking about these behavioral things and a leniency or a reporting or non-reporting, as we just get this bigger overview to start, what are preventative measures going on right now? What is happening from your perspective as a licensed therapist? What's going on in the schools right now that way?
So there are a lot of programs that they do have that they're trying to address if a child has some behavioral issues. Where I see the gap or the crack that people are falling through is, like you said, Evans, the students may know something is happening, and maybe a counselor has this piece, and maybe a teacher has another piece, but they're not talking to each other. So we're having these huge gaps many times. Or there's some rules or regulations that you can't talk to this person, you can't talk. And instead of collaborating, that's where I feel like some of the students are falling through the gaps in that way.
And what would we do to fix that?
Well, some of it would be forming policies or even having, and it could, you know, you have to have HIPAA compliant, and I'm not going to speak into a ton of that. I'll let you guys do that. But with maybe even a documentation in a school where they have their records, that they input something, because something for one person, like a teacher may look and think that's kind of odd or that behavior is off. And another person may think this behavior is off. So if ideally the guidance counselors in the schools could see the combination of all the different behaviors, it's easier to put together the whole puzzle because there are lots of pieces. And because they're pieces, people are holding the pieces. So that's something I see that could be very helpful for maybe some preventative work.
Okay, great. I'm going to follow up with some questions on that shortly. But to continue these large overviews, you know, another thing that we talk about is situational awareness. And Quinn, I'm going to direct this at you because right now, I think just from a parent, we're only beginning to have our students be told what to do, what to look for, any of that sort of thing. Can you talk to that component, the situational awareness part, before something happens, when it is happening, what needs to be done there?
Well, there needs to be some training, and well, let me back up. We need to stop being scared to get involved. As citizens of this country, we need to stop the political correctness because that's getting people killed. When we stop doing that and we stop thinking, well, that guy looks strange over there. Should I get involved? Well, no, because if he's okay, I don't want him to be mad, or I don't want them to feel bad. We need to stop that right now. We need to start getting the police involved, getting security involved. That is law enforcement's job. I would rather you call me and I show up and it's nothing than have to respond reactively to something. So number one, let's start getting first responders involved. Let's start looking around and see what's going on. Some of these active killer events could have been stopped in the parking lot if somebody saw what was going on and then called. So that's number one. Look around. If it looks strange, it probably is strange. Next, when it comes to the training component inside the school, if one of these people comes in and starts systematically executing children, we need to know what to do. Our situational awareness in that is, well, I doubt they're throwing fireworks down the hallway. There's probably something going on. And we need to do drills with our kids. We need to let them know what to do in this type of situation. There's, just like security, there's layers of the situational awareness. And when it comes to security, situational awareness really is number one. It's being there and being eyes and calling somebody when something looks wrong.
Is there training for that now? I mean, we've had 20 years, obviously, to realize that the unthinkable does happen. I mean, Columbine, obviously, no one had seen something like that before. So there was a brand new eye-opening of, yes, this is actually what's happening. Are students being trained right now in that, hide, fight, whatever the terms are? I mean, is that becoming more normal throughout the schools or not?
I wish it was more normal than it actually is. For instance, I went to my son's school and said, hey, I have a company. I know a little bit. Can I train the teachers? No, it's free, totally free. And they would not buy in. And I don't know the motivation. So I took his teachers and I did training for them. And then when he goes through the grades, I will continue to train his teachers. And then when the baby grows up, I'll do the same thing. So, it all depends on the district and it depends on the school. The more we can get involved, the better. If instead of just sitting there, get on the school board. And then when you're on the school board, make those changes, because that's how you make change in this country.
Yes, and gather other parents, and first of all, get your kids in Quinn's class, your children's class. No, seriously, what we do is we show up and we get other people to show up with us in numbers. And we're gonna I'm gonna come back to some of the solutions to these, but the status where we are right now. Laura, can you talk a little bit about the armed defenders, first responders component of all of this?
Sure. And this is one of the stories that's been in the news a significant amount in the days since Sandy Hook especially. But here's the current state in Colorado. It has been legal in Colorado for over 16 years for school boards to authorize armed staff. And what's interesting to me is how few people know that, because it's a policy that is generally enacted in a school district very quietly for very obvious reasons. There's security reasons to not advertise what any of your security plans, not just whether or not you have armed staff. In 2014, that law was amended to add charter school boards. So the law now says that you can be, and I'll talk in a second about how this authorization happens, but school boards or charter school boards. So if you're a charter school in a school district that is not interested in the policy of armed staff, but the charter is, and what we know about charters is that parents usually go start charters because they don't think their kids' needs are getting met in the other schools, and so they can tweak things a little bit. So that's the current state. A lot of people, especially in more national discussions, when you hear news stories on national news stations, you'll often hear people say, "Well, you can't make teachers carry guns," And I am here to say, for the 1,000,000th time, nobody ever, nationwide, anywhere, has ever suggested that somebody be required to carry a firearm. Just flat out. If you ever hear that, please say that is not accurate. So school boards, if they pass this policy, so school board or charter board, when they pass the policy, they have to actually pass the policy and say, we are passing this policy under this statute, and then they look for volunteers. So it's not as if a school board says, we're an armed campus, everybody just be armed. That's not how it works. They look for volunteers, and then those volunteers have to be vetted. Each school district handles it a little bit differently. And then they have to have training. And their training has to have a certain number of hours of different kinds of things. So I am the executive director of Faster Colorado, and we are one of the organizations in the state that provides training to armed school staff. Quinn is our lead instructor. All of our instructors are active duty or retired law enforcement. These are the people you want training armed staff. So that's kind of our current state. We're also numbers. How widespread is this in Colorado? At Faster, we have worked with 34 school districts, and we're right at about 100 or 200 people who've come through our class. Now I specify and say at Faster, that's what we know. I've heard of other schools in different parts of the state that might cross the state border to go get training somewhere else. So I think there are probably more than 34 school districts represented there, but that's about what that looks like. I mentioned before, talk to your kid's school about all of the security things. Ask about this. Are you open to the policy of armed staff is how I would start that question.
Well, I think now that we've talked about the, some of the overview topics, let's dig into this a little bit more. Laura, obviously the idea of arming staff is one of the more controversial, more hot button ones, and anyone can jump in on this. Let's talk about SROs and the situation as it usually is, because most people think, well, there are armed security guard or police officers that are assigned to schools, etc. If that is the case, first of all, how many are there usually, and then what is the need then for arming staff?
I can take that. With the SRO program, again, it depends on where you're at in your jurisdiction. SROs are officers who are in the schools on a day-to-day basis. Well, sometimes those guys have to take vacation. Sometimes they might be on a specialty team and have to do training for that. But if I'm a bad guy and I want to do bad things, I'm either going to take that SRO as my first target or wait for them not even to be there. Wait for them to go to lunch or something like that. So the SRO program is a tremendous program. Those guys are doing great things in the schools. They're the greatest human beings on the planet next to the armed teachers. Next to the armed teachers is the greatest human beings that I've associated with on the planet. And they really love their job. They love going in and being with the kids. And they have a servant warrior mentality that they're going to protect their kids, just like our armed staff. But they're either going to be the first target or they're going to wait for that SRO not even to be there.
And a lot of people believe that every school has their own SRO or, maybe have a couple. What is the reality of how that precious resource is usually distributed?
Well, depends on the jurisdiction again. You'll usually have one, maybe a second SRO in a high school, and then one SRO in the feeder schools for the middle schools, and then on a case-by-case basis, maybe one with all of the elementary schools, maybe none with the elementary schools, because you start to see the criminal activity start around the middle school time. So those elementary schools might not get any kind of attention.
Okay, and in light of that, then tell me, to a parent who would ask, you've got SROs, why would we need armed staff? Can you address that?
Yeah, and I'll reiterate, we love the SROs. The schools love the SROs. We have schools that come through Faster that affording an SRO is absolutely not even an option. Consider a school that the entire school district is in one building and there are 120 kids that come from a 60-mile radius or something. There is literally no money. But in big school districts, we might have school resource officers, and then we might also have the addition of armed security. They're not law enforcement, but they might have a T-shirt on that says that they're part of the security team or what have you. And our concern and why we still advocate for armed staff in those situations is just as Quinn said, if they're either going to be the first target because we know who they are, or they'll wait until they're not there because they want to complete their crime. So we love those programs. We just like the addition of concealed carry armed staff members who are in various places throughout the school.
And you brought up a point one time when I had you on the show, and it sticks with me this is not to share scary statistics, because this is still the minority that happens, but I think you shared that on average in a school shooting, someone is shot every 17 seconds. And if you look at the size of high schools, even if you have your SRO on one side, how long does it take them to get to the other side of the school? It's just something to think about.
Right. And that every 17 seconds, that is a mass killing event, not just schools. So it would include, Aurora Theater and that sort of thing. But yeah, that if you're, we hear this sometimes from suburban schools. Well, we've got cops just up the street, and I say, how many 17-second intervals are you okay with if the cop is around the corner at Chick-fil-A, at wherever? 17 seconds is not very long. So
Yes, indeed.
Can I add one more thing?
Of course you can.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
At the Arapahoe High School shooting, there was an SRO in the school. 42 seconds, he was pressing on that suspect, and we still lost Claire Davis.
That's a good point. Okay, Evan, I want to come back to you and then Jana next. So, Evan, obviously, when these have happened, so much comes in with just a lot of political, strident conversation. And you have been in the situation that I don't know that any of us have ever been in. After Parkland, there was a very big movement that was completely anti-gun, and we'll just go there. You went through the same thing and came to a different conclusion. Can you tell us your process, having been one of the victims, and yet coming to the point of supporting, armed staff and greater security in that way?
Yeah, after what happened at Columbine, I questioned everything, and I went through, deciding whether guns were the issue. And one of the first things that started me on the path that led me here today is, our nation has always had guns. It's always had children, but what it hasn't always had is children murdering other children, like we see at Columbine or Parkland. And so there's an ingredient that goes to the preventative side of things that I think is what has changed in America. And our changes towards what is right and what is wrong. I think there's mental health issues. I think there's disciplinary action issues. There's a lot of factors that play into it. And it's unfortunate that a lot of times after these incidents that the conversation is hijacked for what seems like a political motivated, opportunistic time to attack something that's an inanimate object. It's the person that we need to focus on, and it's not the guns. And it's something I think we can do preventative wise if we band together and really take back our schools.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think we all know that after the STEM shooting and the vigil that happened, the students walked out saying it wasn't guns, it was mental health.
Yeah.
And I think there's a growing awareness, and that's why this is a good opportunity. So to that point, Jana, talking about the mental health, and what Evan said is that there have always been guns, but there does seem to be this change now to where the mental health component has changed amongst the students. Can you talk a little bit about why you think that is? What's changed, and what are the signs that people can look for?
Yes, I can.
Good.
That's a big question.
It is.
And it's a kind of a loaded question because there are a lot of things that have changed over the years. So I have been counseling for 27 years. So I actually have seen a lot of generational changes. one of the things they talk about mental health, well, if we really want to back it up, we can go back to when a lot of the mental health facilities were being shut down. When that started happening, we started seeing more people out in our public and not receiving the assistance that they needed. And therefore, they then started having their own children, or we started seeing the generational changes occur, and they didn't have the resources, or even at times the medication. So that's that. If we go back even further, those are some of the things that we have noticed that have changed, have caused some concerns. The other piece too is the disconnect in families. And some of that, I'm not here to blame that all of the problem is a telephone, but I'm going to say it, that technology has caused what we have seen: kids disconnect, families disconnect, and they are not having some of the interactions that they used to have. So when that is happening, they're almost kind of forming their own little worlds because they can. For instance, I did a group a couple years ago with teens, and it was just on what are some common issues, and let's talk about these issues, and let's bring them up, and let's problem solve together. They came in and they had their phones. They each had each other's numbers, so they started texting, and I just sat back, and I said, start the group on your phone. Just start out, and I'll be over here. You start doing your group. And they just started at it. And then 10 minutes into it, I said, okay, now you need to show me everything you just wrote. And they were like, oh, well, wait, no. And I said, were you texting each other? Were you texting others? Are you even involved? What are you saying? Because they would not read it out loud, but they would say it. So we have that disconnect of, here's reality, here's our interpersonal skills, which we're seeing. And so they're not communicating. And the parents are even, on the phones and driving and texting, or even at the dinner table, or even not even having family dinner. So some of the behavioral things that we're seeing with the mental health piece are parents are disconnected and aren't involved. They may not even know what's going on with their child. So even to have an understanding of the behavioral norms, like we've talked about, what is different? How do you know your child is struggling? Is it because their behavior has changed? How do you know what their behavior is if you're not involved in their lives? So it maybe they're being really quiet, but that's all you've ever known. But inside, lots is going on. So that's part of the mental health piece. We definitely have depression that is going on, but we also have that is that nature nurture. So we have a predisposition many times of depression occurring in family systems. And just because someone's depressed doesn't mean they're going to go shoot somebody or they're going to go be violent. Please hear me, that is not at all what I'm saying. But what is happening is, are they learning it? Is it a medical condition? What does that look like? Is it a situation? Maybe they had a grandfather pass away or something happen. So what is going on? And it's being involved in your child's life, teachers being involved with the teachers to see, because they sometimes tell them different things. So those are some of the disconnects that we're seeing. That's kind of an overview. It's not, there's so much more deeper pieces to that. What else is happening? Are they being bullied in school? Are they struggling because they're not understanding what's going on? There's so many factors that tie into that it's getting to know your child and understanding, and it's hard. It's not easy.
And you brought up a good point, because when I began to look more into this, there was such a huge shift in the 60s where there are certain types of mental illness that tend to more violent behavior. And there used to be the ability to institutionalize if that's happening. We had a caller on our radio show, a mom called in, and she said, I'm terrified of my own son. I know he is one of those people that is going to do this, and all I can ever do is get him committed for 24 hours, and then he is released back out again. So let's say the parent is actually even paying attention. What do? Is there going to be a shift back to the reality that there are some people that do need to be hospitalized?
Great question. That's definitely a push in the mental health field. There are definitely people that need to be inpatient and need to receive the skills and the tools that they cannot get just one-on-one once a week. They need to have that. They need to be monitored, and maybe at times we'll need medication. Mm-hmm. If we need that for functioning, that happens with diabetes or whatnot. If it's a chemical imbalance, let's be real, if we want them to function. And we
Yes.
want them to perform, so to speak, or be active people in our society. So we need to give them the help that they want. But that, I mean, often that goes down into insurance companies. There's so many things that ties into why they won't do a hold. Or many times if you can get the counselor involved and talking to the facility and whatnot, you can sometimes get them a little longer to get the help they need, not because you're just trying to take away their rights, for sure. But that's a tough one. That's one that's still being worked on, for
Well,
sure.
I think if we make our voices heard too, that will help. We do want to open up to questions that any of you may have. If you have questions, please make your way up to the microphones. And until then, I'm going to keep asking questions because I've got tons. But do feel free to come on up, and then we'll take questions from anyone here in the audience. As we're seeing if people are going to come up, I had another question. What I'd like to see, first of all, Quinn, one component. What is the procedure? Let's say there's a school shooting, so we understand. What is the procedure that would happen with first responders, police, etc.?
Well, first, law enforcement, first responders are going to get there and stop the killing. That's number one objective, is stop the killing. And I use the term first responder loosely because the cops on the streets are really the second responders. The fire rescue, those are the third responders. When I show up with my SWAT guys in green pajamas, we're fourth. Our teachers are our first. Our armed staff is our first. The people in school are first responders. So when law enforcement gets there, we're going to stop the killing. Once that is controlled, we will start getting the victims the help they need. At that point, when the scene is stabilized, we are usually, depending on the jurisdiction, going to take those kids to a evacuation point in a secondary area for them to be reunificated with reunificated. I don't even know if that's a word.
I like that word. I'm
But
going to use it there. Yes.
strategery.
Yes.
So they'll be reunified with their families at another area. And all of the larger, I hurt my head a little bit, all of the larger agencies in the metropolitan area in this judicial district have all of the same procedures on how to do that. And we have gotten to the point where once we stop, we are going to let the kids shelter in place when they're safe and get the victims out so we don't have secondary victimization when we take those kids and evacuate them and take them past the crime scene and take them past those people in custody. So if it happens, there's going to be a little bit of time. Normally it's go ahead, get your phones out, start telling people you're okay, you're going to be here for a while, you're safe. It could be a couple hours, but we'll start evacuating you when we don't cause any of those secondary traumas.
Okay, great, thank you. We have a question.
Yes, I have three grown children. They went up through the school systems, and I followed them through the different grades. I was a teacher for nearly 30 years, and one of the biggest problems I faced as a teacher was the PBS, the positive behavior support systems, that did not allow correction or discipline. Where does that play into this?
Well, give me an example of that program. Do not leave. You get to join in.
Positive behavior supports, we can compliment, applaud, reward good behavior, but we cannot correct bad behavior.
That was what the school district was saying.
Yes.
Interesting. So your question is?
Where does this play into the, I'm hearing that we need protective systems in the school, but from a teacher's perspective, if we can't even discipline bad behavior, how are you going to head it off in a reactionary position as a security guard or a SRO?
I can take a stab at that. I think we need parents. I think we need parents and not friends. It's up to the parents to take care of that stuff at home. I think it's very difficult for someone in your capacity to do that. However, if it's my kid and they're messing up in school, please yell at him. Because, kids are kids. And we have to, it really starts at the parenting level, you know?
I was just going to say, disciplinary actions are necessary. We're teaching that. I mean, if you're driving down the road, right, and someone's speeding, there is a consequence for an action. So reality is, as parents, that's a healthy norm to be teaching. This is okay. This is unacceptable behavior. Not everybody, I may get in trouble here, but not everybody gets a ribbon. Like, there are consequences. You're not going to win every race. And that because that's reality. So otherwise, if we're setting them up for failure, as we set them out into the world. So definitely that needs to be happening at home. I would agree. Accountability. If you've not done this, there's a consequence.
Yeah. And I would just add to this, by the way, I look at this all the time for our show because I deal with a lot of mom questions and all that. I do think we need to look at the laws and the policies because there is a push right now in our society to say, especially when you want to reach certain grades, certain levels, certain demographics, to not be corrected, or all that. We have gone so overboard on the society, but and granted, then that comes to you all who have your hands tied in school. And I think once again, the answer to that though is for parents to know, for us to get engaged civically in the laws that are being passed and the policies that are being made, because it is becoming a very permissive society. And from what I understand, many educators like yourself now are hamstrung by that. So I think we need to know the full picture of what's going on.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. And Andrew Pollack has paid us $0 to talk about his book, but we all have dipped into this book, and it's really kind of horrifying. It's called Why Meadow Died, and they did a significant amount of investigation into things just like what you're talking about, that in that case, that child had no home life to discipline him, and the danger was happening at school, and they were not permitted to do the things that they needed to do. So whether it's a change in law, whether it's, I'm going to be a broken record here and say, parents, what is going on at your kid's school? And they can change those policies in the school district as well.
Yes. Thank you for your question. I appreciate that. We have a question over here.
Yeah, I just want to follow up to that last question, actually. And I feel that, you know, there's a disconnect between school boards, you have teacher unions. They don't communicate very well with each other. That's a problem in itself. So you're not having a lot of bilateral conversation about disciplinary actions. Let's say a teacher is experiencing a problem with a student. You know, your upper echelons, if you will, or the administration might not want to acknowledge that for obvious reasons. I mean, just as Evan Todd mentioned, I believe, you know, there's things like, you know, success reports that are coming out from the school and things like that. I feel that a lot of the problems that go on in a school sometimes are redacted or hidden so that, you know, those reports can come out. Nobody wants to admit they have a problem. I think the bottom line is, you know, as school boards and citizens, you know, parents, grandparents, we need to demand that, you know, it's like kind of alcoholism or drug abuse, if you will. If you have a problem and there's school safety and there's shootings taking place, domestic terrorism as I call it, the way we address that is, you know, if teachers are unwilling to be armed or have armed staff, they need to tap out, if you will, and say, you know what, we can't do this. We're hired to teach, but we have a problem. And then I think we need to address the fact, how do we fund that? Because, you know, we're talking about legalizing sports books right now, but why is that money going to creating trails and other things when we have a problem with school safety? I mean, it's just crazy. So that's kind of just my comment and follow-up to that last question.
Great, and I do want to throw it to you all about the funding question. So that's a great question. How is this funded? Because
Sure.
we hear a lot of people, you know, that's one of the defenses. Oh, there's just not enough money for it.
Sure. Not every school thinks that this is a good thing to set money aside for. Some schools who think this is a good thing to set money aside for, there's just not enough of it. We just decided to bypass that whole thing and bypass the politics of budgeting. I agree with you. If we say that school safety is a priority, fund it first instead of all of the other things. But we just bypassed that and said, children are dying, school staffers are dying. We all agree that prevention is job one, but if the prevention steps fail and somebody gets into our schools and tries to harm our children, who is going to save them? So we raise private money. Bullets Both Ways and Angel Shield is a sponsor of FASTER. Some schools can pay a little bit, and that's great. But we raise private money for it. We have a raffle. If anybody wanted to buy a raffle ticket with a really sweet Sig Sauer concealed carry package, we do things like that to raise money so that, and there are unnamed people in this room who've been through class on scholarships. We don't want money to keep people from going to class. If they're going to be carrying on campus, we want people like this training them. So it's all private money.
Yes.
And I hate fundraising, and I'm happy to do it because nothing's more important than our kids' safety.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Evan.
And John, I just want to say thanks for coming out.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
Good to see you.
For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Kendrick Castillo's father. He was killed in the STEM school shooting. So I'm advocating pretty hard for change.
Thanks for raising such a good boy.
Yeah, thank you for being
Thank you.
here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll get to my question now and let others come up. But just to your point, I appreciate your comments on what you're saying. You know, a lot of times as families and community, we believe that adding school resource officers, SROs, is the answer. And I'll be the first to tell you, I love our law enforcement, our military, but the way these shootings work in domestic terror is it's a matter of seconds, not minutes. So 3.5 seconds is the average gunfight. That's it. It's over with. 3.5 seconds. So when you consider, and you know, I don't think that they set up their safety plan like this in schools. If you take a building, for instance, and you have the square footage, and you have an SRO and there's 1 or 2 or 3, just the sheer placement of where they can be in the building. And perpetrators know this. You know, they can still carry out their attack while we're paying money to have protectors where they know where they're at. I support armed staff, and the reason why is anybody who flies or travels, when we get on an airplane, there's an air marshal. You don't know who that person is. You walk through our airports, there's people there to protect us. It shouldn't be any different for our schools or our churches. As long as there is some autonomy and nobody knows who those individuals are who are armed, trust me, perpetrators of these horrific acts of terror who don't suffer mental illness will reconsider their actions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming up. Absolutely. Great. We have another question over here.
Sure, a little tangential, but on the prevention side, I know a lot of people have, personal opinion, falsely pinned their hopes to this new red flag law. If any of you are qualified to educate us on what it actually can and can't do?
Yeah, the red flag law, the broad strokes seem like they could have a beneficial effect, especially in situations like this. But the fact is, the devil is in the details, as they say. And when you actually look at it, even the law that was passed here in Colorado is based on a situation that largely wouldn't have changed anything when Zachary Parrish was murdered, which is tragic. You know, the police response, Quinn could talk to more, but on the red flag laws, a lot of times, you know, when you look at specifically these school shootings, it's not these are people who wouldn't even be identified under the red flag laws, and so there's other aspects to deal with. There's even a darker side of red flag laws, just on the personal level, the vindictive side of things. But when it comes to this specific situation of shootings, it's really, I see it, going to have zero effect.
Would anyone else
I'll
like
just
to address that?
add quickly, not necessarily related to what we're talking about here, but the red flag laws as they are currently in place, there's no due process. And so as Evan's talking about the sort of nefarious aspect of that, good people could be harmed without being able to tell the judge, and here's my side of the story. I just wrote a blog about California's new enhanced red flag law, which adds employer, coworker, and teacher to the people who can turn somebody in, so to speak. Such a bad law, the ACLU does not support California's new red flag law. That ACLU, yes. So yeah, there's some bad stuff out there. Appreciate the question.
And just one other thing on top of that, California's original red flag law was marketed from a situation where 4 people were actually stabbed to death before someone went on a shooting spree. So it just shows that even if it had been enacted and in place, 4 people or more would have been murdered by knife. So the problem isn't guns again, it's dealing with the individual, and we need to get individuals help, not guns.
Right, and Jana, maybe you can address this, but I've heard that in the Colorado law, therapist is one of the people who are not allowed to do a red flag filing.
I mean, that's how I understood it as well. Not done
Yeah,
in depth,
okay,
but-
so, I mean, you know, the very people who might, or some of the people who might actually be in possession of that knowledge of who some of these people are, can't initiate
Correct.
the process, which a lot of us don't think would work anyway. But even if we gave it the benefit of the doubt, it seems that not the right people can flip the switch.
And even the hard part for us as therapists, I can call for a 72-hour hold, and it can get overridden by someone who's doing just an initial assessment, not someone maybe who has sat with them or been their therapist for a while. So that there's such a disconnect in that way as well. That that's what we're trying to do, and it's not something I do often. I think I've done in 27 years 3 of them, because you take it very serious and you have lots of options, and you work with the system. But yes.
So to your point, an emotional ex-boyfriend could call that, but not a therapist. So there's a flaw in that. Okay, our next
No
question.
offense taken.
So, first of all, thanks for being so invested in the subject, and I perfectly believe that shielding our children from harm is the right first step. My question is about prevention as well. I've been in healthcare for 35 years. I've got a minor interest in public policy at this point. And my question is, I've seen neurologically that the human brain does not get balanced until a child is 14 years of age. The FBI threat assessments can't tell us anything about what a shooter looks like before it happens. They really do not have enough data. Do you know if there's neurological work being done either in behavioral health or something in that category to see how social media affects a brain pre-14 years of age or between 14 and 18 years of age, so that we might make actual policy changes to prevent their brains from being overwhelmed knowing that they don't fully develop until they're at least 14 years of age?
It's a great question. Great question.
Thanks.
And yes, there's research being done, but we do not have substantial evidence or empirical evidence at this point to say, yes, this is what it looks like, or here's how we can do complete preventative measures. I mean, they're working on it, but which is not, that sounds great, but it's not helping us in the moment, which is why I lean into what is the behavior and your child, and what are the changes that you're seeing, and if they're here and all of a sudden you see a drastic change on the other polar. I didn't say necessarily bipolar. We love terms many times. In our society we adopt all these terms, like everyone's bipolar now, everyone's on the spectrum, and everyone, we kind of go through this nice little pattern. But they don't right now that I'm aware of. I mean, there could be some that I'm not, and I can research even more, but no, it's more trying to see more behavioral and what is the parenting and are the family environments to try to assist the more the nurturing piece.
So you're 27 years, do your instincts tell you that defining a friend the way we define it on social media is hurting the concept of social relationships so people get isolated? Should we really look at that as parents? I mean, so when we go onto social media, there are friends you have defined by social media. She's my friend on Facebook.
Correct.
Right? But that's not really the way I defined a friend when I was growing up. Do we need to be really, really aware of what our children believe a friend is or isn't because that may be causing them to be isolated as part of that?
That's a great question. And I do believe that. I do believe that we have so, because of the disconnect, the interpersonal skills, how they identify they're my friend, and they could be across the world, right? I mean, I've had kids say, "Oh, I've got lots of friends," and so I ask them, "Well, tell me about them. What are they like? What are their favorite colors? What do they look like? All of it." And many times they can't give me those answers when it's from a social media standpoint, obviously. And I say, "Well, what defines?" Which is a great question. So it is helping kids understand what are friendships, and you can kind of have it layered. Well, like a bullseye. I will sometimes do a bullseye with kids, and I'll say, "Tell me about your friendships." And the inner bullseye, they'll put people's names down, and they'll layer it out. And I'll ask, "What defines that they're in the middle of the bullseye? Help me understand that." They will talk about, "Well, because I've known them," or, they talk to me every day on whatever social media. And I said, "Okay, so you tell all your deepest issues or problems to them." "Well, yeah." Why? So we start to dig, and they are lost. They don't know, because they have these surface ideas of, "I've just known them," or "I talk to them a lot," or "they like me," or "they will talk to me." And so it is helping kids identify what are friendships, what are healthy friendships, what does that look like, and what are the criteria for that.
Yeah.
Does that?
Thank you. That's
Mhm.
great.
Thank you. And I just would add one other thing, by the way. I did a stint in Hollywood, and I just have to say, as parents, we can choose what they watch. A disconnect are hyper realistic movies like Kingsman or movies like that glorify violence in a way that is so surreal. There becomes a disconnect between what is really pulling a trigger with a video game. So it drives me crazy when Hollywood gets angry about it, and then they produce more of this hyper-violent, unreal kind of thing. So that's another place where we can step in as a culture and as parents. Next question.
So Laura, outside of Colorado, what do you see other states or large communities doing in school safety? And as an extension, how widespread is the FASTER program or other similar programs that are teaching educators to carry?
Okay, yeah, thanks for that question. I'll take a step back before I answer that and say, I hear from a lot of parents who say, "My kid's school needs FASTER in their school." And from a vocabulary perspective, FASTER is a curriculum of training armed school staff. There's other stuff out there. I think what we have is the best out there, but that's because we do. I mean, I'd make it better if it wasn't, right? So we brought the FASTER curriculum here to Colorado from Ohio, where they started training FASTER just in the days after Sandy Hook. They said if just one teacher shows up, we're training that one teacher, and they had 2,500 people sign up for the first class of 25. They were overwhelmed. So Colorado is the first state to actually have FASTER here. Think of it like a franchise that they charged me $0 for. So we have the curriculum and we have the name. The name FASTER reminds people that the faster we stop the killer and the faster we stop the bleeding, the fewer people die. So, and we're in our third training year this year. 32 states now, I think, have some lawful path to allow armed staff. When I hear people say, "Gosh, it's so controversial," I actually see the opposite nationwide, that as more parents see that could be my kid, they say, "We have to do something, and if everything else breaks down, who's going to save my kids?" But Florida has, I think it's called the Guardian Program, where they almost make them they almost deputize them. It's this very extensive training. Illinois, and I'm going to just say the word again, Illinois, the State Department of Education or whatever it's called there, they are offering a resolution to allow school districts to authorize armed staff. And I got called to do an interview on it yesterday, and I'm sorry, Illinois? So I think that just illustrates for us how far parents are really thinking this through nationwide. And as the last resort. So I don't know if I answered all the questions, Regina. Okay.
And I wanted one of you, Evan, you've shared this statistic before. What's great about our country, where we have different states doing different things, we have an experiment and we can see what works and what doesn't. Can you share the statistic from the crime prevention study, I guess it is called?
Yeah, John Lott's Crime Research Institute did a study over a 19-year period where I think it's 1,000 schools or school districts. I think it's school districts. Mostly are across the nation, but have armed staff for the last 19 years, and there's been 0 mass shootings or incidents. Whereas in places that don't have protection, we've seen the rise on the news over the years where these shootings happen. So where there is armed staff, it's not only a prevention, but they're there, ready, willing, able, and trained to take care of a threat if it is. And it's proven itself to be safe over the last 19 years.
And it's a complex topic, as we've talked about, but there's a simple thing we know. Most of these perpetrators are cowards and will go where there is not someone that is armed. So that may have been a prevention in and of itself. So that's an important statistic. I think we are on this side. Here we go. Next question.
Questions for Jana. Earlier, you in reference to mental health, you had mentioned that when we identify individuals that look like they need assistance, and it's sometimes good to get them medication. I read an article recently that had some startling numbers as far as the perpetrators in a lot of these crimes that almost all of them shared the same common characteristic, and that was that they were all on some type of medication that affects your mood and affects the side effects could be depression and that type of thing. I was wondering, in your professional opinion, do you think sometimes in schools we are over-medicating these children as far as they identify something and automatically the first response a lot of time is medicate this child, put him on some sort of...
Well, I think just as we can give tons of antibiotics too at times, I think that there can be times that maybe anybody can be misdiagnosed or whatnot. And I don't know where they're always getting medication from, because sometimes I will encourage for certain types of medication, and a majority of mental health medication, psychiatrists, because that's their area of specialty. So I don't know that we always necessarily are over-medicating. It can happen for sure. I don't know that I can speak into that. I haven't done any statistics on that lately, but I know most aren't. That's not my go-to, is automatically go to medicate them. We try some behavioral techniques. We try various DBT, lots of different techniques. But if it legitimately has a chemical imbalance or they literally cannot function, then we look at options. And my hope and encouragement for any of them, if I say, hey, chat with your doctor about that, because I'm not a medical doctor, is to start on the lowest dose and move your way up to see what can work and not work. Does that answer?
Yes.
Okay.
Next question.
Thanks for providing the opportunity for us to have this discussion and ask our questions. I feel like a lot of the topics that we're touching on directly affect me and my family. We have had, my daughter has seen counseling, has been diagnosed with traumatic stress and things of that sort. And for us, we experience a difficult time getting the help that she needs. We're part of the CU Health system, and we've been on a 10-month wait to try and get into counseling. And fortunately for us, we can pay out of pocket a little bit, not as much as they want her to go, but at $200 a month, it gets spendy. I don't know if I really have a question in here anywhere, but I guess, how do we bring these issues to the proper channels in order to get the type of changes that we need made? It's so multi-layered and multifaceted. My daughter, she's turning 16 next week, and she experienced that clique mentality, the mean girl thing. She was, the focus of their whatever issue was, and lost all of her friends in one summer, and it was devastating, and I don't know how to handle that. I mean, I don't have any experience with that kind of stuff, and we try to be there and listen, but we also suffer from technology, I mean, even I want to just escape sometimes, so I know my children are the same way, and I see how much of an effect that has had. And now I'm postponing my second daughter getting her phone because of that, Those types of things. I don't know. Like I said, I don't have a question, I guess. I have some ideas and suggestions. In my perfect world, you know, I would like to see us move away from this bubble wrap society. You know, I mean, like, I don't like bullying, but at the same time, that helped fortify me growing up. I was, you know, I received it sometimes, and unfortunately I dished it out sometimes too, but I think that's part of a natural, healthy upbringing, how to be able to navigate that kind of stuff. Where do you learn how to draw your boundaries, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable? I like the idea of being able to protect ourselves, so what you guys are doing is phenomenal, and I really wish our legislators would get on board, but they're tuned into the wrong group of people who are leading their charge with emotion and not with evidence. I would like to go even further and start to incorporate this stuff into school curriculum, you know, like conflict resolution training, types of suggestions that counselors have given our daughter, like when she starts to feel disconnected or she starts to feel anxiety welling up, they give her tips and tricks. I would like to see that incorporated into middle school curriculum so that, you know, they can be empowered and, you know, have the ability to kind of walk themselves out of an issue. Also, it's stigmatizing, you know. We talk about mental health and all of a sudden it's like, you know, in this new red flag era that's coming, I call it a red scare, you know, as a firearm owner, and with the issues with my daughter and with the stuff that we're seeing, these extreme cases in social media where eavesdropping or overhearing, you know, I heard one extreme case of an 84-year-old Korean war vet who had his house raided and confiscated because of a waitress at a restaurant, you know. So we see the issues of, you know, moms taking their kids out to the shooting range and then they can't go back to school. There's a lot of stuff that we have to get involved in and really, like, I mean, go to the school board meetings and talk about that kind of stuff. Who would I talk to? I mean, besides the school board, how do we go about that kind of, to foment a groundswell to get those things moving?
Thank you for sharing that. And this actually, we're about to run out of time because it's going to lead to my last question that I want to ask you guys as we go down. And maybe we'll take this last question before we do. Because the thing I want to close out with is, in a perfect world, in each one of your expertise, what would you recommend be the solution? Because it's different. But before we get there, thank you for that, because you set us up for the very last question. We do want to hear from this last gentleman. One last quick question if you have it, and then we're going to end answering yours.
Thank you.
Well, mine isn't so much a question. I'm actually married to the really pretty blonde in the middle.
That's my husband.
Congratulations to you, sir.
Thank you.
Good choice.
I married way up. I'm like a lifelong case study.
No.
I retired from law enforcement. I spent my entire career in law enforcement, and Jana and I started a business, and I'm not standing up here to promote anything. I just want to give you guys a couple stats real quick, and I think it's really, really important. I'm glad Quinn said what he said earlier. One of the things that we've been trying to get done is to talk about who the true first responder is versus the emergency responder. Yes. Quinn would be an emergency responder. Teachers, students, parents, you would be a first responder. You're a first responder to your kids. But in the classroom, it's the teachers. So that's number one. Number two, it's truly awareness as well. Jana and I and a couple others within our company, we just did an entire school district evaluation assessment. And what brought us to this particular school district was about 500 parents in a screaming match in a room like this over one child that brought in a knife and didn't do anything with the knife. It was a pocket knife. He carried it into the school, and immediately the response was, we have to have metal detectors. The breakdown in communication, and the reason I bring this point up, was so severe within this particular district that the screaming that was going back and forth was more threatening far than any knife that was being carried into the school. When I went down to do the assessment at this particular high school, there were 54 wide open doors out of 62 doors in the school, with people dropping off lunches, selling drugs out of the back, the whole 9 yards. We sat there, we watched it, we videotaped it, and we took it to the school board. What was disturbing about it is they wanted to rifle 1,700 kids through a metal detector every single morning at an hour and a half, as opposed to having situational awareness to just simply close doors. Mm-hmm. And I think out of respect to both Evan and John that are here, the tremendous losses that we've seen in this country, the one thing that we say all the time in our business is there's nothing more important than the safety and the well-being of a child. Evan's a survivor. He's a survivor. I don't know what that would have been like to sit in there, but we teach on this stuff all of the time. Quinn teaches on this stuff, the FASTER program. My wife sits down and counsels the other side of this after the loss has been occurred. I cannot begin to tell you, and I'm not here as an anti-red flag person, but I do want to tell you a 30-second story. In 1995, I was given an M1 hold to go pick up the director of mental health for the Richland County medical system in Richland County, South Carolina. The person that signed the order for the mental health hold to prove that it could be done on a whim was the number 2 person in the mental health system that didn't like her boss.
Yeah.
We picked her up against her will, and we took her in to be evaluated in the very hospital that she ran the mental health system out of. It is a dangerous law, and it is something that we should all be researching and concerned about. But just as important as that also would be the school systems of knowing that you have open doors in your school. Why are we putting all the blame on the teachers when the responsibility starts at home, and on and on and on I can go on. But I just wanted to make that point because I think it's very, very crucial. We're really oversighting the obvious, and we're getting lost on the things that truly just don't matter.
Thank you. And I so appreciate your sharing that. One thing, when I was talking with Laura on the air one time, we always hear about, oh, we don't want our teachers to have to carry guns. This is also standing for the teachers who will die for our kids, but why should they have to? So there are many teachers that do want to be able to defend themselves as first responders. One last comment or question, and then we will get to the final wish list. Here we go.
It's more of an observation, but if you want a question, pretend that there's a question mark at the end, and you can respond. An observation, I have a sense that there's some overarching perspective that is not being addressed sufficiently. You talk about mental health, you talk about budgeting, you talk about parents and so on. What I have not heard is an awareness of ideology and who makes the decisions and what they believe in. When Quinn was told that he couldn't teach even for free, this isn't a training issue. This isn't a budget issue. This isn't a mental health issue. This is ideology. That issue of the young man who was suspended from school, one of the speakers mentioned, because he went out shooting with his mom. It's not a training issue. These people can be trained till the moon turns to cream cheese. They're not going to change. It's not a budget issue. It's an ideological issue. The irony, by the way, in mentioning, somebody mentioned bringing a knife to school. Don't we all remember 10, 15 years ago when this beautiful little 7th grader was suspended from a northern Colorado middle school because she told her teacher that she accidentally brought her mom's lunchbox. And this Dean's List student, honor roll student, was suspended. Again, this is not training. This is not budget. This isn't mental health. This is ideology. And Laura gets told by some person, I will not have teachers mandatory that they be armed. That person knows better. That person knows they are lying. They know better. And if improbably they don't know, it's a willful, intentional ignorance. And it has to be attacked that way. We have to attack the ideology. If you're waiting for parents to be better parents, nothing is going to happen. It hasn't been for 2,500 years. It's not going to happen next week. So I suggest that the real attack has to be an ideological attack. These people who reject Quinn, who reject Laura, are willfully, knowingly putting children's lives at risk. And that's the argument, and I think that's the way we have to approach it. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. And I would say, before we get to this final question for everyone, one of the things I do agree with is here's the ideological challenge I feel like, and we talk about this a lot in our show. There is a movement in our culture to take the rights away from parents. And parents have given up their rights even more than they have been taken away. I think the solution to all of this is for parents to realize once again, we may feel like the ants versus the grasshoppers because we've been told that we don't count and we are not the experts and we don't get to say. The minute that turns around, this all stops immediately. And that's the ideological, I was in the Soviet Union and I watched a system where the children belong to the state. It's time for us to stand up and say they do not belong to the state, they do not belong to the school system, they do not belong to the bureaucracy, they belong to us, and we have the right to say what happens in that place where we drop them off. Those were my ending comments, but you got me there early. So, okay, hot under the collar. Let's end with this, and then we're gonna have Aaron come back up. Let's go down the line and let's end with solutions. If you could write the law today, if you could come with a solution in your area, whether it is how do we identify and treat, how do we deal with the issue of the permissiveness that's happened, give us 1 or 2 suggestions that you think are practical things that could be done today.
So I do want to touch on a couple things.
Absolutely.
You might get your hook out now, but
no hook.
For one, I can tell you that I carried a pocket knife from about 5th, 6th grade every day to school up until 2 students tried to murder me. And that was the last day that I carried a pocket knife because I was told that if I carried a pocket knife, I'd be expelled from school. So, which is kind of ironic that how those policies planned out. And touching on some of the things that you said, you're right. There's a lot of behavioral issues with bullying, with discipline, with the environment and the culture in schools, and a lot does need to change. Going back to the teachers that are handcuffed and not allowed to discipline, there are a lot of things that need to be done and addressed and focused on that will go to prevention. And that's why you asked what you can do, and this is promoting Angel Shield, but that's exactly what we're doing. We're trying to get parents like you to join us, to band together, and we're going to start taking back our schools and our churches and our communities one step at a time, and we're starting here. And this is just the ground floor, and we're going to go throughout Colorado and hopefully throughout the nation, but it's going to take parents like you who come and stand up and take back our communities. And one final thing is, I've always looked at this huge topic that I could talk your ear off till 5 a.m, but I've always looked at it 2 ways. Like cancer, there's prevention and there's treatment. And that's why we have a panel of experts who focus on, if we can prevent 100% of these, that's exactly what I'm going to try to do. But we cannot deny the fact that cancer, once you get it, you cannot prevent it anymore. Just like when someone comes in through that door, your prevention will not stop it. The signs will not stop it. The bullying programs, the medication, the counseling, none of that prevention stops it. And that's one of the aspects that is overlooked every time, because the treatment is scary. You are sending someone in to physically, forcibly stop someone from murdering. But that's the fact. That's the reality we live in. And on that note, I talk to parents all the time who, when they find out my history, they say, oh my God, I can't even imagine. I get those texts and I don't know what to do. And I always ask them, and this is something that I think you should ask other parents when they bring up how terrifying those texts and calls are that their schools are on lockdown, is, do you know what's happening next? If that was real, most of the warnings that we get are not real, but do you know? I need some water here. Sorry. Commercial
It's right
break.
here for you.
That was brought to you by Red Solo Cup. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No advertising. No, but you should ask yourself what happened. If that is real, what is happening in that school? What is their plan? Do you know what the plan is? And if not, how are you going to change it so that your child is protected? And that's really, to me, the bottom line. And it starts here and now. So thank you all for coming. I do appreciate you, the ones that come out and are starting to make a difference. And I want to thank the Angel Shield team as well, too.
Yes, thank you.
On my end, so in my degree, yes, it's psychology. My minor is child and family development. I go back to the core. I go back to families. What are we teaching? What ownership are they taking as children, as parents? What are you teaching in the home? Are you giving them, I'm going basic, but giving them chores. Is there a responsibility that they have? Are you teaching them here are healthy people to be around? Here are expectations. I mean, some of the research shows those who expect, hey, you're going to go on to college, or this is an expectation. Even you can't date till you're 16, whatever it is. Those kids, if that's what they're hearing, that repetitive information, then that's the path that they head down. So we need to help guide and lead, and we're not, we're training them basically is what you're doing. So that is not happening. There's so much gray, or they want them to feel good, or everybody to be happy. Again, are we training them for reality in life? So to me, one of the helpful tools would be start them. And some may already have 16-year-olds. It's not like you can't still work on that and try to teach them. But that's where I think my ideal would be when they're young. You're really inputting in their life. You're forming those relationships and those behaviors, so that as they get older, that becomes who they are. If that makes sense. So that's my piece. Thank you again for coming as well.
Yes, I'll say my thanks so I don't forget them. It's really appreciate everybody who came out and are asking questions. I would like to just propose that we think about the notion of armed staff or any armed citizens from a self-defense standpoint, the human right of self-defense. And if we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, what is more personal to us than the ability to defend our life? And if you think about schools being federal gun-free zones, and if I were a teacher, and by the way, when we say armed teachers, janitors, principals, lunch lady, bus driver, lots of different folks, right? But if I work in a school and I have a concealed carry permit, and I can go to the store armed, I can go to the movie theater armed, I can go to church armed, I can walk down the street armed. But the minute I go into my job in a school, I am disarmed. And that is probably the place that I am the most vulnerable. So Coach Aaron Feast, who heroically died protecting children at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, put his body between bullets and children. Nobody would say he's not a hero. But what about Aaron Feast's family? Do they not have the right to have their father, their husband, also come home? Does he not have the human right of self-defense because he has chosen to work in a school? So I would ask us to think about that aspect as well. And it's one of those aspects that doesn't come up a lot in the political discussion. But it's one that I think really hits us right here. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Laura.
Well, in my perfect world, we bring back families, and we strengthen those family bonds. We be parents to our children, and then from there, we treat our children like they're our most precious natural resource, because they are. We have our staff who are vetted and volunteer to carry in our schools. And when evil comes through the door, they face that evil in the eye and say, "You will not take my kids today." And when we do that, and when we face evil and we look it in the eye, we take power away from it. And every time we do that, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. We take back our country, and our children will no longer be scared to ask at the dinner table, "Daddy, what do I do if somebody comes in my classroom and tries to hurt me?" Like my son did 6 months ago. That's what this country needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's give our panel a big hand. And we now like to welcome back Aaron Boyd, the founder of Angel Shield.
All right, thanks to each of the panel members for your time and expertise. Deborah, thanks for moderating. You did a fantastic job. And thanks to all of you for being here. I hope you've been informed and inspired. Join us in this movement. Be part of the solution. Get involved. Get involved in your schools, your school districts. Attend board meetings. Ask questions. Offer your opinions. Influence. Volunteer. Your help can be a powerful contribution. If you're a professional in a related field, offer your expertise. Pursue a greater understanding of the events and responses in school shooting scenarios. Know the statistics, not just the political rhetoric. Consider thoughtfully new security options and talk about these options with other parents, your principals, school board members. And know your school board candidates. Research their experience and expertise. Research their experience and ideologies, what that gentleman was talking about earlier. Seats are coming up for election this November. Vote and be an educated voter. Support Angel Shield as a volunteer, as a financial contributor. With that being said, I'd like to acknowledge our Angel Shield team real quick, if you could all come up here. So we're a new organization. We got our 501c3 status in May, and I'd just like to recognize our Angel Shield team. This is our core team. We have a wide range of expertise and talent, and I'm absolutely thankful for each and every one of you and honored to be on the same team with you. We're rolling up our sleeves. We're getting started. We're going to make a difference. Join us. Help us. Thanks again for being here, everyone. Stand up, represent, prepare, protect. God bless.